Some stories linger in the shadows like whispers in the wind. They drift from one generation to the next, growing darker with time, feeding on the fear they inspire. Tonight, I will tell you a story, one that has haunted the shores of Kootenai Lake for over a century. A tale of a restless spirit, a lost ship, and the cold, unforgiving waters of Idaho. But be warned, this is not a story for the faint of heart. In the late 1800s, Kootenai Lake was a bustling hub of trade and travel. The lake itself, a vast expanse of deep blue water stretching over 90 miles in length, was surrounded by dense forests and towering mountains. The indigenous Tinaxa people had revered the lake for centuries, calling it the water of the spirits. They believed it was a gateway to the afterlife, a sacred place where the boundaries between the living and the dead were thin. Among the many traders who sailed its waters was a man named Samuel Kootenai Brown. Brown was known for his sharp mind, his rugged good looks, and his relentless pursuit of fortune. He had a reputation for being fair but firm, a man who could make deals with a handshake and a hard stare. Kootenai Brown had a ship, a sturdy, reliable vessel named the Tempest. For years he sailed the lake, delivering goods, forging alliances, and building his reputation as one of the most respected traders in the region. But as fate would have it, fortune is a fickle mistress. Kootenai Brown was not always a trader. Born to a poor family in Boston, Samuel Brown had learned the value of hard work at a young age. His father, a cobbler, had instilled in him a strong work ethic, but it was his mother's stories of adventure and exploration that truly shaped his destiny. She would read him tales of explorers charting the unknown, of fortunes made and lost on the high seas, and of men who dared to dream beyond the confines of their station. When Samuel was just 15, he left home in search of adventure. He took odd jobs on ships, learning the trade from seasoned sailors, and eventually worked his way up to becoming a captain of his own vessel. It was during one of these voyages that he first heard of Kootenai Lake, a remote, untamed wilderness far to the west, teeming with opportunity. He arrived in Idaho in 1879, just as the logging and mining industries were beginning to boom. The region was rough and untamed, a land of opportunity for those brave enough to seize it. Brown quickly made a name for himself, not just for his business acumen, but for his fairness and integrity. He built the Tempest himself, from wood he felled with his own hands, and it quickly became a familiar sight on the lake, a symbol of reliability in an unpredictable world. But as the years passed, the demands of trade and the allure of profit began to change Brown. He became more ruthless, driven by a desire to expand his empire. He started taking risks he never would have before, venturing into uncharted waters, making deals with unscrupulous characters. Some say he became obsessed with wealth. Others say he was simply a man trying to survive in a world that was becoming increasingly competitive and cutthroat. It was during this time that he struck a deal with a mining company up north, a deal that would prove to be his undoing. The company had struck gold, quite literally, and needed to transport a large shipment of ore down the lake. They offered Brown a fortune for his services, and he, seeing the chance to secure his legacy, accepted without hesitation. It was a stormy night when Kootenai Brown set out on his final voyage. The sky was dark and foreboding, the air heavy with the promise of rain. Brown's crew, seasoned sailors who had been with him for years, were uneasy. They had seen storms before, but there was something different about this one, something unnatural. Against their better judgment, they set sail, driven by Brown's insistence that they must reach their destination by dawn. As they sailed into the night, the storm grew more intense, the waves crashing against the hull of the Tempest, the wind howling like a banshee. Lightning split the sky, illuminating the terrified faces of the crew. Rain lashed against them, cold and relentless. They tried to steer the ship, to keep it on course, but the storm was too powerful. It tossed the ship around like a toy, pushing it further and further off course. In the chaos, they lost sight of the shore. The world around them was reduced to darkness and fury, the roar of the storm drowning out their cries for help. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm stopped. The winds died down, the waves calmed, and there was silence. When the morning came, there was no sign of the tempest. The lake was calm, the sky clear, as if the storm had never happened. The only evidence of its passing was the debris that washed up on the shore, broken planks of wood, a shattered mast, and a single waterlogged journal. The journal belonged to one of the crew members, a young man named James McAllister. In it, he described the voyage, the storm, and the panic that had gripped them as they realized they were lost. His last entry was a single chilling line. "The ship is sinking. We are all going to die." The disappearance of the tempest shocked the community. Kootenai Lake was a dangerous place, but ships had gone missing before. Search parties were organized, scouring the shores for any sign of the wreckage or survivors. But days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, with no sign of Kootenai Brown or his crew. It wasn't long after that strange things began to happen. Fishermen reported seeing a ghostly ship, eerily similar to the Tempest, drifting silently across the lake at night. It would appear out of the fog, its sails tattered, its hull cracked, but somehow still afloat. It would vanish just as quickly, leaving only ripples in the water. Then, people started seeing him Kootenai Brown. He was always described the same way, standing on the shore, staring out at the water, his face pale and gaunt, his eyes hollow and empty. His clothes were soaked, clinging to his thin frame, and his hands were outstretched as if reaching for something just beyond his grasp. He would vanish if approached, leaving behind a chilling cold that seeped into the bones, a cold that no fire could warm. Some claimed to hear his voice, a low, mournful wail that echoed across the lake, a plea for help that went unanswered. As the sightings continued, fear spread through the community. People began to avoid the lake at night, fearing an encounter with the restless spirit of Kootenai Brown. The story of the ghost ship of Kootenai Lake was born, a tale of tragedy and loss that would haunt the region for generations. But not everyone believed in the ghostly tales. Robert McKay was one such skeptic. A man of science and reason, Robert had little time for ghost stories or superstitions. He had grown up hearing the legends of Kootenai Lake, but he dismissed them as the fanciful imaginings of an isolated community. That all changed when his brother, Thomas, a seasoned fisherman, went missing on the lake. Thomas had gone out one night to check his nets and never returned. His boat was found the next morning, adrift near the shore, empty. Devastated by his brother's disappearance, Robert decided to investigate. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the story. He spent months interviewing witnesses, gathering evidence, and piecing together the events leading up to his brother's disappearance. The more he learned, the more convinced he became that something was wrong. The stories were too consistent, the details too precise. There was something in the water, something that had taken his brother, just as it had taken Kootenai Brown and his crew. Robert was determined to find out the truth, no matter the cost. He rented a boat and set out onto the lake one moonless night, armed with nothing but a lantern and his resolve. The night was still and quiet, the water like glass. Robert rowed out to the center of the lake, his eyes scanning the horizon, his heart pounding in his chest. He felt a chill run down his spine, a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. Hours passed, and just as he was about to give up, he saw a faint glow on the horizon. As the light grew closer, he realized it was the ghostly ship, the Tempest, drifting silently towards him. He could see Kootenai Brown standing at the helm, his eyes fixed on Robert, his face twisted in anguish. Robert felt a surge of fear, but also a strange sense of empathy. He realized that Kootenai Brown was not an evil spirit, but a lost soul, trapped between worlds, searching for something: his ship, his crew, his fortune, or perhaps his peace. In a moment of clarity, Robert raised his lantern and called out to the ghostly figure. "Kootenai Brown," he shouted, "your ship is lost, your crew is gone. Find peace, and let go of this world." For a moment, there was silence. The ghostly figure stared at Robert, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he lowered his head, his shoulders slumping as if a great weight had been lifted from them. The ghostly ship began to fade, its edges blurring, its form dissolving into the mist. Robert watched as Kootenai Brown disappeared, his figure merging with the fog, leaving only the cold, empty lake behind. Robert felt a weight lift from his shoulders, as if the spirit had finally been released. He returned to shore, his mind racing with what he had seen. He knew that no one would believe him, but it didn't matter. He had seen the truth, and he knew that Kootenai Brown was finally at peace. Robert's encounter was the last reported sighting of the ghost ship of Kootenai Lake. Over time, the story faded into legend, and the lake returned to its quiet, peaceful state. But those who live near the shores of Kootenai Lake still remember the tale of Kootenai Brown, the lost trader who wandered the waters in search of his lost ship. And some nights, when the moon is hidden and the wind is still, they say you can hear the faint sound of a ship's bell, echoing across the lake, a reminder that some souls never truly find their way home. Years later, Robert McKay found himself drawn back to Kootenai Lake. His life had changed in the years since his encounter with the ghostly ship. He had moved away, started a family, and tried to put the past behind him. But the memory of that night haunted him still, lingering in the back of his mind like a ghost he could not exorcise. He had come to say goodbye to his brother, to find closure for the loss that had driven him to the lake so many years ago. He stood on the shore, looking out over the water, the sun setting behind the mountains, casting long shadows over the lake. As he stood there, he felt a presence beside him. He turned and saw a figure standing on the shore, looking out over the water. It was a man, tall and thin, his face hidden in shadow. Robert's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the figure, even though he had never seen him before. It was Kootenai Brown, but this time, the ghost looked different. He was not the tormented soul Robert had seen years before. His face was calm, his eyes clear. He looked at Robert and nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Robert nodded back, feeling a sense of peace wash over him. He knew that Kootenai Brown had found his way home, and in doing so, had helped Robert find his own peace as well. Robert left Kootenai Lake that day, knowing he would never return. He had found the closure he was looking for, but he also knew that the lake would always hold a special place in his heart. It was a place of mystery and magic, a place where the boundaries between the living and the dead were thin. The story of Kootenai Brown and the ghost ship of Kootenai Lake continues to be told to this day, passed down from generation to generation. Some say it is just a legend, a story to scare children and entertain tourists. But those who have lived near the lake know the truth. The lake is a place of secrets, a place where the past and present collide, where the spirits of the lost and forgotten linger. And on quiet nights, when the moon is full and the air is still, they say you can still hear the sound of a ship's bell echoing across the water, a reminder that some stories are never truly over. Thank you for joining us tonight for this tale of mystery and the supernatural. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel for more chilling tales from the shadows. And remember, sometimes the ghosts of the past are closer than we think.